For 24 years, Marcus Jeffries believed he was the luckiest man in the world. He believed his wife adored him. He believed his marriage was solid. He believed that when his wife looked at him across the dinner table every night, she saw the same man she had chosen at 23, the same man she had built a life with, the same man she still loved without reservation. He believed all of this because his wife, a woman named Lorraine, had spent 24 years making sure he believed it. She had protected him from a truth so heavy that carrying it alone had nearly broken her in half. And she would have carried it forever, quietly, invisibly, the way she carried everything, if a Family Feud survey question had not reached down into the deepest room in her heart and pulled the truth out in front of 200 people, 4 cameras, and the one man in the world she had spent her entire adult life trying to protect. When Steve Harvey heard what Lorraine said, he stopped everything. Not the round, not the game, everything. He shut the show down, walked to the center of the stage, and for the first and only time in the history of Family Feud, he told the production team to turn off the clock. Because what was happening on that stage was not a game anymore. It was the most important conversation of 2 people's lives, and Steve Harvey was not going to let it happen with a timer counting down. If you believe that some truths are so powerful they change everything the moment they are spoken, subscribe to this channel right now and turn on notifications. Because what Lorraine said, and what Marcus did when he heard it, will stay with you for a very long time. The Jeffries family from Baton Rouge, Louisiana arrived at the Family Feud studio on a humid Thursday morning in October 2025. There were 5 of them. Marcus Jeffries, 48, a high school football coach and history teacher at a public school in North Baton Rouge. His wife, Lorraine, 47, a medical billing specialist at a cardiology practice. Their son, Cameron, 22, a senior at Southern University studying mechanical engineering. Their daughter, Nia, 18, a high school senior about to start at LSU in the fall. And Lorraine's mother, Miss Dolers, 71, a retired school cafeteria manager who had spent 32 years feeding children in the East Baton Rouge parish school system, and who, upon being invited to appear on Family Feud, had said, "I've been watching Steve Harvey since he had a Jerry curl. I would walk to Atlanta if I had to." They wore matching maroon shirts. They were loud, warm, and immediately likable. The production team had written in their notes that the Jeffries family had incredible energy, natural humor, and genuine affection for each other. All of that was true, but families, like still water, can be calm on the surface and deep in ways that the eye cannot measure from the shore. Marcus Jeffries was the kind of man who made you believe that good people still existed. He was not flashy. He was not loud except on the football sideline, where his voice could carry across an entire field and still sound like encouragement rather than anger. He had been coaching football and teaching American history at Northside High School for 21 years. He made a modest salary, lived in a modest house, and drove a pickup truck that was old enough to vote. He did not care about any of that. Marcus Jeffries cared about 2 things, his family and his players. And to Marcus, those 2 categories overlapped more than most people realized. He had grown up in Scotlandville, one of the historically black neighborhoods of Baton Rouge, the oldest of 3 boys raised by a widowed mother who worked as a hotel maid. His father, a refinery worker, had died in a workplace accident when Marcus was 11. The settlement from the accident was modest and disappeared quickly into bills. Marcus's mother, a woman named Gloria who everyone called Miss Glow, held the family together on a maid's salary and a stubbornness that bordered on supernatural. She told her boys the same thing every morning. Get your education, get your degree, get yourself into a position where you can help people who look like you, because that is the only success that means anything. Marcus got the education. He got the degree. And then he went back to Scotlandville, walked into the nearest public high school and started teaching. He had been there ever since. His players were his extended family. Over 21 years, Marcus had coached hundreds of young men, many of them from homes without fathers, from neighborhoods where the odds were stacked against them in ways that textbooks could describe but never truly convey. He stayed late after practice to help players with homework. He drove them to SAT prep classes on Saturday mornings. He wrote recommendation letters so detailed and personal that admissions officers at colleges across the state knew his name by heart. 14 of his former players had gone on to play college football. 7 had graduated with degrees in fields that had nothing to do with sports. 3 were now teachers themselves. Marcus kept a wall in his office covered with their photos, their graduation announcements, their wedding invitations. He called it his real scoreboard. His actual football record was respectable. His real scoreboard was extraordinary. Lorraine Jeffries was the quiet engine that made all of this possible. She was the one who managed the household finances so carefully that Marcus's coaching salary, supplemented by her medical billing income, stretched to cover a mortgage, 2 children, and the small, unreported expenses that came with being married to a man who regularly bought cleats for players who could not afford them. She was the one who cooked dinner at 10 at night after Marcus came home from away games. She was the one who sat in the bleachers at every single football game for 21 years, home and away, keeping stats in a spiral notebook and cheering for boys she treated as her own. She was the one who drove Nia to dance practice and Cameron to engineering club meetings and still made it to the cardiologist's office by 7:30 every morning to process insurance claims with a speed and accuracy that made her indispensable. Lorraine had grown up in Baker, Louisiana, a small city north of Baton Rouge. Her mother, Miss Dolers, had raised Lorraine and her 2 brothers alone after Lorraine's father, a long-haul truck driver, left when Lorraine was 7. Dolers was formidable. She ran the cafeteria at Baker High School with the efficiency of a general and the warmth of a grandmother, and she raised her children with a combination of fierce love and absolute intolerance for self-pity. "Life is hard," Dolers told her children. "Harder for some than for others, but nobody ever got anywhere by sitting in the hard. You stand in it, you walk through it, you come out the other side, and then you help somebody else do the same." Lorraine carried those words into her marriage, into her work, and into the secret she had been keeping for 24 years. The secret was this. 24 years ago, when Lorraine was 23 and Marcus was 24, in the second year of their marriage, Lorraine had been diagnosed with a heart condition. Hypertrophic cardiomyopathy. It was discovered during a routine physical when a doctor heard something in her heartbeat that should not have been there. The diagnosis came with a prognosis that felt like a verdict. Lorraine was told that her heart muscle was abnormally thick, that the condition could worsen over time, that it carried a risk of sudden cardiac arrest, and that she might not live past 50 without medical intervention. She was 23 years old. She was married to a man who had already lost his father suddenly and violently, and she was 2 months pregnant with Cameron. Lorraine made a decision in the parking lot of the cardiologist's office on the afternoon of her diagnosis. She decided not to tell Marcus. Not that day, not during the pregnancy. And then, after Cameron was born healthy and Marcus looked at her with the unguarded joy of a man who believed his life was complete and perfect, not then either. The not yet became a year, then 5 years, then 10. Lorraine managed the condition in secret. She took medication that she told Marcus was for migraines. She attended cardiology appointments that she scheduled during work hours and described as staff meetings. She wore a medical alert bracelet that she said was a gift from a coworker who sold jewelry. She modified her diet gradually enough that Marcus never noticed. She was monitored. She was medicated. She was, by clinical standards, stable. But she was also living with a weight that no human being should carry alone. She kept the secret because of Marcus. Specifically, because of who Marcus was and what he had already survived. She had watched him carry the loss of his father for over a decade, had seen the way his voice changed when he talked about Harold, had felt the tension in his body every year on the anniversary of the accident. She knew that Marcus's deepest fear, the one he carried beneath the coaching bravado and the history lectures and the steady, unshakable presence he offered to everyone around him, was losing someone else. Lorraine could not give him that fear. She could not walk into the living room where Marcus was grading papers and say, "I have a heart condition that might kill me." She could not do that to the man who had lost his father at 11 and who flinched, almost imperceptibly, every time someone he loved was late coming home. So she carried it. Alone, for 24 years, Miss Dolers knew. She had known since the beginning. Lorraine had told her mother the week of the diagnosis because she needed someone, one person, to know. Dolers had listened in silence, then held her daughter, then asked only one question. "Are you being treated?" Lorraine said yes. Dolers said, "Then we pray and we manage, and we do not put this on that boy's shoulders until there is a reason to." It was not the advice a therapist would have given. It was the advice of a woman who had raised 3 children alone on a cafeteria salary and who understood that sometimes protecting the people you love means carrying the thing that would break them. Cameron and Nia did not know. Lorraine had never told her children. She managed her appointments, her medication, her symptoms, her fear, with a discipline that would have impressed a military strategist. She had done this for so long that it had become as natural as breathing, which was ironic, because her breathing was one of the things she monitored most carefully, counting the beats per minute when she felt the flutter in her chest, timing her walks to avoid the kind of exertion that could trigger an episode. smiling through the moments of lightheadedness that came without warning and left without explanation. The morning of the taping, Lorraine dressed in the maroon family shirt and the small gold cross necklace that Marcus had given her for their 10th anniversary. She checked her blood pressure before leaving the hotel room. It was elevated, but within the range her doctor had told her was acceptable for a day of unusual stress. She took her medication in the bathroom while Marcus packed the car. She texted her cardiologist a brief update. And then she walked out the door and smiled at her husband and her children and her mother, and she drove to the studio to play a game show, carrying inside her chest both the defective heart that had shaped the last 24 years of her life and the secret that had shaped the last 24 years of her marriage. The Jeffries family was matched against the Sandoval family from Phoenix, Arizona. Steve Harvey came out to his customary thunderous reception and worked through the introductions with his signature blend of warmth and wit. When he reached Marcus, the energy was immediate. Marcus Jeffries, football coach, history teacher, 21 years. Steve shook his hand firmly. 21 years at the same school? Marcus nodded. Same school, same neighborhood I grew up in. Steve pointed at the camera. That is a man who walks the walk. I respect that deeply. The audience applauded. Marcus waved it off with the humble deflection of a man who genuinely did not understand why that was impressive. When Steve reached Lorraine, she said, I'm Lorraine, medical billing, and I'm Marcus's biggest fan. She looked at her husband as she said it, and the love on her face was so visible, so unguarded, that several women in the audience smiled involuntarily. Steve said, How long have you been married? Lorraine said, 24 years. Steve grinned. 24 years. And you still look at him like that? Lorraine smiled. He makes it easy. The audience sighed collectively, the way audiences do when they see something they wish they had. Miss Dollars, at the far end of the podium, pressed her lips together and looked at the floor. She was the only person in the building who understood the full weight of what Lorraine had just said. The first 2 rounds were lively and competitive. The Jeffries family won the first round and lost the second, with Marcus providing the kind of animated, enthusiastic gameplay that made him a natural for television. He cheered for every correct answer, hugged his children after good responses, and pointed at Lorraine after she scored 31 points on a question about family traditions. That's my wife, he shouted. The audience loved him. The production team loved him. He was everything the show was designed to celebrate, genuine, warm, and completely in love with his family. The third round changed the trajectory of the afternoon, the episode, and ultimately the lives of everyone on that stage. The question was, name something a wife keeps secret from her husband. The Jeffries family was playing the round. Answers came from the family members. Cameron said, how much she spends. Correct, number 2. Nia said, her real feelings. Correct, number 4. Marcus gave an answer that did not make the board, and he laughed it off with good humor. Then it was Lorraine's turn. She walked to the podium. She placed her hands on the surface, and something happened that nobody, including Lorraine, had anticipated. The question, those 8 words, reached into the room she had kept locked for 24 years and opened the door. Not because she wanted it to, not because she had planned it, but because the human heart, both the physical organ and the metaphorical one, has a limit to how long it can hold something before the pressure finds an exit. Lorraine looked at Steve Harvey. Her eyes were clear, but her hands were trembling on the podium. She opened her mouth, closed it, opened it again. The audience leaned forward. Steve watched her with the patient attentiveness of a man who had spent his career reading the space between what people said and what they meant. And then Lorraine spoke. Not to the board, not to the camera, to the space in front of her, the way a person speaks when they are talking to the truth itself. That she's sick, Lorraine said, 2 words, spoken softly, and they landed in the studio like a stone dropped into a well so deep that the splash took a moment to arrive. The board revealed the answer. A health problem was the number 1 answer, 45 points. The audience applauded, but the applause was uncertain because something about the way Lorraine had said it, the trembling hands, the voice directed at no one, the pause before speaking told them that this was not strategy. This was something else entirely. And then every person in the studio looked at the same place at the same time. They looked at Marcus. Marcus was standing at the family podium. His expression had shifted, not dramatically, subtly, the way a sky changes shade before a storm. He was looking at Lorraine with a focus that had nothing to do with a game show. He was looking at her the way a man looks at his wife when he has just heard something that does not make sense yet, but that his body, his instincts, the part of him that operates below language has already begun to process. Lorraine, he said, just her name. A question and an answer and a prayer all compressed into 3 syllables. Lorraine turned around and looked at him. And in that look, in the 2 seconds of silence between their eyes, Marcus Jeffries learned the truth. He did not need her to say it. 24 years of marriage had made them fluent in a language that did not require words. He saw it in her face. He saw the guilt, the relief, the terror, and the love, all of it crashing together in an expression that told him everything. His wife was sick. She had been sick. She had been carrying something, and she had never told him. Marcus's face changed. The confident, animated football coach disappeared. In his place was a man who looked exactly like the 11-year-old boy who had been told his father was not coming home. The color left his cheeks. His hands gripped the podium. His eyes did not leave Lorraine's face. "How long?" he whispered. The microphone barely caught it, but the front row heard it, and the front row gasped. Lorraine's composure, the composure she had maintained for 24 years through medication schedules and secret appointments and smiling through episodes of lightheadedness, collapsed. Her chin fell, her eyes filled, and she said in a voice that was barely audible, "Since before Cameron was born." The studio went silent, not quiet, silent. The silence of 200 people understanding all at once that a woman had carried a secret about her own mortality for 24 years to protect the man she loved from the one fear he could not survive. And that the game show question that was supposed to produce a funny answer about credit card bills had instead cracked open the most profound secret of a 24-year marriage. Marcus let go of the podium. He took one step, then another. He was moving toward Lorraine, but his body was not steady. He looked like a man walking against a current, every step costing him something. Cameron reached for his father's arm. Nia had both hands over her mouth. Miss Dollars stood perfectly still, her eyes closed, her lips moving in what could only have been a prayer, and Steve Harvey stopped everything. ACT-4, the turnaround 12-00-16-00. Steve did not signal the production team. He did not consult anyone. He raised his hand, looked directly at the stage manager, and said, "Turn off the clock." Then he turned to the director's booth and said, "Keep the cameras rolling, but we're done with the game for now." The clock on the fast money board went dark. The buzzers went silent. The competitive architecture of Family Feud dissolved, and in its place was a stage with a family standing on it and a truth that had just torn through 24 years of protection. Steve walked to the center of the stage. He moved slowly, deliberately, with the gravity of a man who understood that the next words spoken in this room needed to be the right ones. He positioned himself between the podium where Lorraine stood and the family group where Marcus had stopped walking, frozen mid-step, his hand still reaching forward. "I need everyone in this room to understand what just happened," Steve said. His voice was low and controlled, but carried to every corner of the studio. "A woman just told the truth, after what sounds like a very long time, and the reason she kept it hidden is standing right there." He gestured toward Marcus without pointing. "She kept it hidden because she loves him, and she knew that the truth would cause him pain, and she chose to carry that pain alone rather than share it with the person she built her life with." He paused. "I have been on television for over 30 years. I have heard a lot of things on this stage. But I have never heard two words as heavy as the two words Lorraine just said." The audience was weeping, not scattered tears, widespread open weeping. The sound of 200 people crying is unmistakable, a low, collective murmur that vibrates through a room like something physical. Steve walked to Marcus. Marcus was standing in the middle of the stage, his hand still extended toward Lorraine, his face wet. Steve stood in front of him and spoke quietly enough that the words felt private despite the microphones. "Marcus, I can see what you're feeling right now because I've felt it. I lost people. I've had moments where I found out things that rearranged everything I thought I knew. And the first feeling, the very first one, is going to be anger, not at her, at the situation, at the unfairness, at the time you didn't get to share the weight." Marcus nodded barely. "But I need you to listen to me, brother. That woman over there has been carrying something for 24 years that most people cannot carry for 24 hours. She did it to protect you. She did it because she watched you lose your father and she would not give you another reason to be afraid. That is not deception. That is the most extreme act of love I have ever heard of." Marcus broke. The tears came with a sound that made every person in the audience cover their heart. It was not the cry of an angry man or a betrayed man. It was the cry of a man who had just realized that his wife had been fighting a battle alone, in the dark, for his entire married life, and that every morning she smiled at him over coffee. Every night she sat beside him on the couch. Every game she attended and every meal she cooked and every moment she seemed perfectly, beautifully, impossibly fine had been an act of will so immense that he could not fathom how she had sustained it. Steve turned to Lorraine. She was standing at the podium, her hands still flat on the surface, the tears flowing freely. Steve walked to her and stood close. He did not touch her. He just stood close enough that his presence was a wall between her and the overwhelming weight of what she had just done. "Lorraine," I'm not a doctor, and I'm not going to pretend to understand what you've been living with, but I am going to tell you something that I think you need to hear." She looked at him. "You have been the strongest person in this building since you walked through that door, stronger than me, stronger than anyone in this audience, stronger than your husband knows, because strength is not the absence of fear. Strength is carrying the fear so that the people you love don't have to, and you have been doing that every day for 24 years. He paused. "But you don't have to carry it alone anymore. That man is walking toward you right now. Let him carry it with you." Marcus had started walking again. His steps were unsteady but certain, the steps of a man who knew where he needed to be even if his body was struggling to get him there. He reached Lorraine. He reached her and he did not say a word. He put his arms around her and he held her with a ferocity that made the audience cry harder than they already were. He held her the way you hold something precious that you have just learned could be taken from you, with a grip that said, "I am here, and I am not letting go, and I am so sorry I did not know." Lorraine broke completely in his arms. 24 years of composure, of managed medication and secret appointments and smiling through the fear, dissolved into the chest of the man she had been protecting since the day she walked out of that cardiologist's parking lot. She sobbed with a force that shook both of them, and she said, through the sobs, the words she had been holding since she was 23 years old. "I was so scared, Marcus. I was so scared and I couldn't tell you because you had already lost your daddy and I couldn't give you another thing to be afraid of losing." Marcus held her tighter. His voice came from somewhere deep. "You should have told me. I would have carried it with you. That's what I'm here for, Lorraine. That's what I've always been here for." Cameron and Nia moved to their parents. Cameron wrapped himself around both of them, his engineering brain useless against the structural collapse of everything he thought he knew about his family. Nia pressed her face against her mother's shoulder and wept. Miss Dolers walked slowly to the group, placed her hand on Lorraine's back, and whispered just loud enough for the family to hear, "It's done now, baby. It's out. You can rest." The audience's standing ovation was not the usual Family Feud celebration. It was something closer to a benediction. 200 people standing in witness to a family that had just been broken open and was, in real time, choosing to hold each other through the breaking. Steve let the moment last as long as it needed. When the family finally separated, he asked if they wanted to continue the game. Marcus looked at Lorraine. Lorraine wiped her eyes, took a breath, and said, "Mr. Harvey, I have been keeping a secret for 24 years. I think I can handle fast money." The audience laughed through their tears. Steve grinned. "Lady, I have no doubt." Cameron went first for fast money. His hands were shaking and his voice was unsteady, but he pushed through with the determination of a young man who had watched his mother's strength and was not about to let her down. He scored 128 points. Then Lorraine walked to the podium. The audience fell completely silent. She placed her hands flat on the surface, the same way she had placed them minutes earlier when the truth had come out. But this time her hands were still. The trembling was gone, something had shifted. The weight she had carried for 24 years was no longer hers alone, and the difference showed in her hands, in her posture, in the clarity of her eyes when she looked at Steve and nodded. Steve began, "Name something that is worth any price." "My family," Lorraine said. "Name something people take for granted." "Tomorrow," Steve's expression flickered. "Name something a mother protects. Everyone. Name something you carry every day. Hope. Name something you would fight for with everything you have." Lorraine paused 1 second, 2, then she said with the quiet certainty of a woman who had been fighting for it for 24 years, "One more day." The board revealed the answers. "My family for something worth any price." Number 1 answer, 44 points. The audience began to build. "Tomorrow for something people take for granted." Number 1 answer, 36 points. Steve closed his eyes. "Everyone for something a mother protects." Number 1 answer, 30 points. 3 in a row. The studio erupted. "Hope for something you carry every day." Number 1 answer, 27 points. 4 consecutive number 1 answers. People were screaming, crying, holding each other. "One more day for something you'd fight for with everything you have." Steve turned to the board. The answer lit up. Number 1, 35 points. Perfect score, 172 points. Combined with Cameron's 128, the Jeffries family had 300 points and the $20,000 prize. But the number meant nothing compared to what had just happened. The studio erupted into the most emotional response the production team had ever recorded. The audience was not just standing. They were roaring. They were chanting Lorraine's name. They were holding strangers and crying openly, and doing the thing that human beings do when they witness something so real that it reminds them of every truth they have ever been afraid to say. Marcus came out from behind the partition and went straight to Lorraine. He took her face in both hands and looked at her, really looked at her, the way he should have been looking at her for 24 years but could not, because the full picture had been hidden from him. "We are going to fight this together," he said. Hear me? Together, starting now, starting today, no more secrets, no more carrying. We carry it together or we don't carry it at all. Lorraine nodded. She pressed her forehead against his, and for a moment in the center of a game show stage, two people who had been married for 24 years stood forehead to forehead and breathed together, and the breathing was the most intimate thing anyone in that studio had ever witnessed. Backstage, Steve Harvey sat with the Jeffries family for over an hour. He later said it was the single most important hour he had spent in his entire television career. He spoke with Lorraine and Marcus together, telling them that what he had witnessed on that stage was not a breakdown. It was a breakthrough. For 24 years, you have been the strongest person in your marriage, Steve told Lorraine. And you did it alone. From this point forward, the strength belongs to both of you, and I promise you it will be bigger than anything you carried by yourself. Spoke with Miss Dolers privately. He told her that he understood the impossible position she had been in, knowing her daughter's secret and honoring her daughter's choice even when it went against every instinct. Dolers looked at him with eyes that held 30 years of silent vigilance and said, Mr. Harvey, a mother's job is not to make her children's decisions. It is to stand beside them when those decisions get heavy. I have been standing beside Lorraine for 24 years. I am not tired yet. Steve said it was the most profound definition of motherhood he had ever heard. He spoke with Cameron and Nia. Both of them were still processing the revelation that their mother had a heart condition they had never known about. Steve did not try to explain or contextualize. He simply told them that their mother was the bravest person he had ever met, and that the way they had held her on that stage told him everything he needed to know about the kind of family the Jeffries were. Cameron, still visibly shaken, said, I'm an engineering student. I'm supposed to be able to solve problems, and I didn't even know there was a problem. Steve put his hand on Cameron's shoulder and said, Son, your mother didn't hide this from you because she didn't trust you. She hid it because she loved you enough to carry the weight so you could grow up without it. That's not a problem you failed to solve. That's a mother doing the hardest job in the world. Cameron broke down again. The episode aired 6 weeks later. The response was immediate, overwhelming, and unlike anything in the history of the show. The clip of Lorraine saying that she's sick was viewed 65 million times in its first 48 hours. The clip of Marcus crossing the stage to hold his wife was viewed 90 million times. But the clip that transcended everything, the one that was viewed over 220 million times and became the most watched piece of content Family Feud had ever produced, was the unbroken 5-minute sequence from Steve stopping the game through Marcus's embrace of Lorraine through her perfect fast money round. Media critics called it the most emotionally powerful 5 minutes of unscripted television ever broadcast. It was translated into 37 languages. It was shown in medical schools, nursing programs, and marriage counseling sessions. A broadcast journalism professor at Columbia called it the moment when a game show accidentally became the most important program on television. The hashtag Carry It Together trended worldwide for 14 consecutive days, the longest-running television-related hashtag in social media history at the time. The phrase was adopted by patients, caregivers, spouses, and families dealing with chronic illness, terminal diagnoses, and the particular kind of loneliness that comes from managing a health crisis without support. Tens of thousands of people posted their own stories. A woman in Detroit revealed her breast cancer diagnosis to her husband for the first time after watching the clip. She posted a video of the conversation, and it was viewed over 20 million times. A man in London told his children about his Parkinson's diagnosis after keeping it private for 3 years. A mother in Sao Paulo showed the clip to her family before telling them about her lupus. In each case, the refrain was the same. Lorraine showed me that carrying it alone is not strength. Sharing it is. The movement was credited by multiple health organizations with a measurable increase in patient disclosure rates and family engagement in chronic illness management. The medical community's response was significant and sustained. The American Heart Association shared the clip on their official channels with the message, hypertrophic cardiomyopathy affects 1 in 500 people. Many of them carry the diagnosis in silence. Lorraine Jeffries carried hers for 24 years. Please talk to your family. Please let them carry it with you. The post was shared over 5 million times. Cardiologists across the country reported increased appointments from patients who had been delaying evaluation or had been managing conditions without involving their families. Lorraine's story became a case study in patient communication courses at medical schools, not as an example of what to do, but as a window into the emotional reality that drove patients to hide diagnoses from the people closest to them. The Jeffries family entered a new chapter immediately. Marcus went with Lorraine to her cardiologist the week after the taping. It was the first time in 24 years that he had been in a room where his wife's condition was discussed. The cardiologist, who had been treating Lorraine for over a decade, said that Lorraine's management of the condition had been exemplary and that her prognosis was significantly better than the initial assessment had suggested. Medical advances over the past 2 decades had transformed the treatment landscape for hypertrophic cardiomyopathy, and Lorraine's consistent compliance with her medication regimen had kept her in a stable category. Marcus sat in that office and listened to 24 years of medical history he had never known existed, and when the appointment was over, he sat in the parking lot of the cardiologist's office and cried for 20 minutes. Lorraine sat beside him and held his hand and said nothing, because after 24 years of silence, she understood better than anyone that sometimes the person who had been carrying the weight needed to set it down, and the other person needed time to feel how heavy it was. Marcus's response to the revelation extended beyond the personal. He started a health awareness program at his school called Talk to Your Team. The program encouraged student athletes to discuss health concerns openly with their families and coaches rather than hiding injuries, symptoms, or diagnoses out of fear. It was built on the principle that Marcus had learned, painfully from his own wife's secret, that carrying a health concern alone does not protect the people you love. It isolates you from the support you need. The program launched at Northside High and expanded to 12 other schools in the Baton Rouge district within 6 months. Marcus presented the program at a state coaches conference and was given a standing ovation by 600 coaches who understood that the toughest lesson a football coach could teach had nothing to do with football. Steve Harvey invited the Jeffries family back for a follow-up segment 10 months after the original episode. When Lorraine and Marcus walked onto the stage holding hands, the audience's response was so overwhelming that the production team had to add 45 seconds to the segment's runtime to accommodate the standing ovation. Lorraine wore a white blouse and the same gold cross necklace. Marcus wore a Northside High polo shirt. They looked like exactly what they were, a couple who had weathered the most difficult truth of their marriage and had emerged not intact but closer. Different, more honest, more connected. Less protected and more real. During the segment, Marcus spoke first. 10 months ago, I learned on this stage that my wife has had a heart condition since before our son was born. I'm not going to pretend that I've fully processed that. I don't think a person processes 24 years in 10 months. He paused. But I will tell you what I've learned. I learned that my wife is braver than anyone I have ever coached, taught, or known. I learned that the woman who sat in the bleachers at every one of my football games was carrying something inside her chest that could have taken her from me at any moment. And she never told me. Not because she didn't trust me, but because she loved me so much that she would rather carry the fear alone than share it with me. His voice broke. That is the most loving and the most infuriating thing anyone has ever done for me. And I will spend the rest of my life making sure she never has to carry anything alone again. Not a secret, not a fear, not a grocery bag, nothing. The audience laughed and wept simultaneously. Lorraine squeezed his hand. Lorraine spoke next. For 24 years, I woke up every morning and the first thing I felt was my heartbeat. And every morning I wondered if today was the day it would stop. And every morning I got up anyway. I made breakfast. I went to work. I sat in the bleachers. I raised my children. I lived my life. And I did it all with a secret sitting in my chest next to the defective heart that started all of this. She paused. I don't regret keeping the secret. I know that's complicated. I know some people think I should have told Marcus from the beginning, and maybe they're right. But I was 23 years old and pregnant and terrified, and the man I loved had already lost his father to a sudden death, and I made the only decision I knew how to make. She looked at Marcus. But I also know this. The day Steve Harvey stopped that game and my husband walked across that stage and held me, I felt something change inside my chest. Not medically, something deeper, something let go, something I'd been clenching for 24 years finally relaxed. And for the first time since I was 23, I took a full breath. The studio was silent, and then it was not, as the ovation built from the back and rolled forward until every person in the room was standing. Steve revealed during the segment that the Jeffries episode had inspired what he called the most important initiative of his entire career. Family Feud, in partnership with the American Heart Association and a network of corporate sponsors, had established Lorraine's Heart, a national program providing free cardiac screening, genetic testing for hereditary heart conditions, and family counseling for patients and their loved ones. The program specifically targeted underserved communities where access to cardiology services was limited and where cultural barriers often prevented patients from discussing diagnoses with their families. The program launched with $7 million in funding, the largest single philanthropic commitment in the show's history. In its first 6 months, it had screened over 8,000 people and identified more than 200 previously undiagnosed cardiac conditions. Steve said every one of those 200 people is a Lorraine who doesn't have to carry it alone. Lorraine covered her face with both hands. Marcus put his arm around her and held her while the audience applauded. Miss Dolers had the final word of the segment. Steve asked her how she felt, knowing that the secret was finally out. Dolers straightened in her chair, looked at Steve with the steady gaze of a 71-year-old woman who had spent 32 years feeding other people's children and 24 years guarding her own daughter's secret, and said, "Mr. Harvey, I have been holding my breath for 24 years, not because I was afraid my daughter would die, because I was afraid she would die before her husband knew how brave she was." She looked at Marcus. "Now he knows, and I can breathe." The studio wept. Steve wept. The cameramen wept. And somewhere in a cardiologist's office in Baton Rouge, a doctor who had been treating Lorraine Jeffries for over a decade watched the clip on her phone during a lunch break and set it down on her desk and stared at the wall for a very long time, thinking about every patient she had ever treated who had walked out of her office and carried the diagnosis alone. Lorraine Jeffries still works at the cardiology practice in Baton Rouge. She still processes billing claims with speed and accuracy. But now, when a patient comes through the door looking the way Lorraine looked 24 years ago, scared, overwhelmed, and already planning who they will and will not tell, Lorraine takes a moment to sit with them, not as a billing specialist, as a person. She tells them her name. She tells them she has hypertrophic cardiomyopathy, and she tells them one thing: tell someone, tell the person you love the most. Because carrying it alone will not protect them. It will just break you in a way they can't see. She does not tell them about the game show. She does not tell them about the 200 million views or the standing ovations or Steve Harvey's tears. She just tells them the truth. And the truth, coming from a woman who lived inside the alternative for 24 years, is usually enough. On the mantle of the Jeffries family home in North Baton Rouge, next to Marcus's coaching trophies and Cameron's Engineering Honor Society certificate and Nia's high school diploma, there is a framed photograph from the Family Feud stage. It is the moment Marcus reached Lorraine. His arms are around her. Her face is pressed into his chest. Her hands, the hands that trembled on the podium when the truth came out, are gripping the back of his maroon shirt with a force that is visible even in a still image. It is not a beautiful photograph. It is not composed or flattering. Lorraine's mascara is running. Marcus's face is crumpled. Neither of them is looking at the camera. But it is the most honest photograph in the house. It is the photograph of two people learning after 24 years that a marriage can hold more weight than either of them imagined if both of them are willing to lift. Marcus touches the frame every morning before he leaves for school. Lorraine does not know this. He does it when she is in the kitchen making coffee, the same way she used to take her medication when he was in the other room. Some habits of love, even the secret ones, are not about hiding. They are about holding something too precious to speak out loud. Marcus touches the frame, picks up his keys, and walks out the door to coach football and teach history and be the man his wife protected for 24 years. And every morning, just before he reaches the truck, he stops, takes a breath, and does the thing he has done every morning since the day he learned the truth. He checks his phone for a text from Lorraine. It is always there. 3 words that mean more to him now than they meant at any other point in their 24-year marriage. 3 words that used to be a greeting and are now a promise. I'm still here. If this story changed you, hit that like button, subscribe to this channel, and turn on the notification bell so you never miss a story like this one. Share this with someone who is carrying something alone. Share it with someone who needs to hear that the people who love them would rather carry the weight together than live without knowing it exists. And if you are the one carrying something, please hear what Lorraine finally learned after 24 years. The people who love you are stronger than you think. Let them in. Let them carry it with you, because that is not weakness. That is what love was built for.